Really excited to see you guys today, and great to see some familiar faces. I was here in 2018, back when we were in Lewiston, and it's awesome to be back in town and see everything that you guys have been up to. As mentioned, I wear a lot of hats around housing. One of the reasons that has happened is that it turns out that housing is very, very complicated for any of you guys that are working on it. That'll feel really familiar. So we often show this graphic to show all of the different things that we've discovered you have to be a little bit of an expert in to get housing built in the United States. It shouldn't be like this. We're not claiming that this is a positive thing, but this is currently the environment that we're working in. You have to be an expert across the board to be able to get even really small, simple houses built, which feels very silly sometimes. But we get really hands-on in my office. We do everything from construction. I have a general contractor's license. We do a lot of our own general contracting, policy writing, zoning codes, architecture, landscape architecture. One of these is me tiling a bathroom 7 months pregnant. We really get into it. One of the things that the Incremental Development Alliance has always said is you have to commit yourself to a place that you love, that loves you back. And for me, as you guys heard, that is Fayetteville, Arkansas. I have done a number of projects as an architect, as a designer. I was on our planning commission down there. I also have a small development company. And all of this work is in downtown Fayetteville, where we also, because we've got a real infiltration of our city government by urbanist millennials, we've also gotten some very cool codes passed, which have let us test a lot of things. So one of the things I often recommend to people is to realize that you can do some what feels like really wild code changes, and actually if no one else is paying attention, they probably won't notice. You can't go too far. It's going to be that we've done some things that we were like, this might be it, this might be too far. We've never yet found that line where we needed to come back and change it. So I know that can be more of a challenge in New England. Your town meeting, if you're in a town meeting town, I'm so sorry. You know, I talk a lot nationally. IncDev has trained about 9,000 people in the last 10 years in 32 states. And most communities feel like they're really special. They're really unique. Their challenges are really unique. And the thing that's really hard to come in and say is actually almost everybody's having the same 5 problems, just dialed up or down. You guys are our only exception. You really are special. The town meeting structure, yikes. And we try to build what our town needs, right? And so that means we get into a wide range of projects because our town needs a lot of different things. But today we're talking about housing specifically. Most of our work is infill, although we also do new town layouts. And generally, we're trying to build places for people, right? This is real estate development, but the buildings are the backdrop to people's lives, to people's businesses, to people's families. And so we try to build houses that are the kind of houses that little kids see and understand. We call this our CAH, right? That's our cute as hell business model. There's some other acronyms we've used before, but that's the most publicly appropriate one. And one of the things I want you guys to think about is your household type, and a lot of what I'm going to be talking to you about today is building more dwelling units, right? How many planners do we have in the room? All right, I'm going to use my brief amount of planner speak. I need you to get more dwelling units on smaller lots. That's it. That's the whole challenge. And here's why. This is not who we're housing, right? Our American household is not a nuclear family, 2.5 kids and a dog. 76% of your households have no children in them right now, today. This is Maine numbers specifically. 17% of your households are nuclear families. That is an enormous minority of our households that need multiple bedrooms. And the reality is a 3-bedroom house on an acre lot is a really bad fit for a single woman in her 60s. It's also a really bad fit for somebody that has 3 kids because they don't have enough bedrooms, right? It's too small for most families. It's too big for most of these households that are our majority, which is 1 person living alone or 2 people with no kids, right? So what we think of as our typical household, right, where 62% of them are three or more bedrooms, we've got way more house per person than most people want, most people need, or most people can afford. So your entire challenge is finding creative ways. So this is national numbers. I'll show you New England in a minute. Again, I told you guys were special. You're the only region that I'd made a different diagram for. Our average household size is 2.4 people, right? So that's including all of those giant families. I'm personally really skewing this up in Arkansas, right? We've got a household size of 7, which means there's how many of those single people living alone to balance us. Our average lot size is also pretty big, right? This is a big house on a big lot that's really unusual historically. This is not the size that we used to build houses. And you guys have this extra challenge that because of your zoning, your lot sizes are enormous. Nationally, they're one of the biggest sets of lot sizes in the entire country, and they make absolutely no sense for preservation of green space, right? Because a lot of them end up as mown lawns that we're putting chemicals on. They make no sense as agricultural space preservation, right? It's really hard to farm people's 1-acre lots. And they also make no sense for maintenance for lots of aging single people who live alone. Huge mismatch between what we allow and what we really need. This is always, I think this is an important slide, but it's always the one that sort of takes people's brains a second to wrap around. One of the big demographic pushes that we're seeing in this household size of why we're in such a housing crisis is not actually population growth. We're seeing housing crisis, housing pressures, even in communities with dropping populations. The reason that is more people want to live alone. So as we go from our 1950s 4 people per house to our current 2 people per house, right? Even if we've had no population growth, we need twice as many houses, right? So we have to hit these numbers even in communities where we're not seeing enormous population growth. Often those want to be small units. More 3-bedroom houses on 1-acre lots is not helpful. Right, here's, this is gonna be a presentation of really high value graphics to explain these ideas, right? So if we need to double our number of houses without population growth or with a little bit of population growth, we're gonna need to develop an enormous additional set of land in our communities. We often don't actually like or enjoy what that looks like. So if we right size the household types and the lots to what people actually want, need, and can afford, we can take up less space. We can provide people with the kind of housing they want at the price point that they want without ruining, everything around our town. You can get even better efficiency if you'll start to let people build those houses inside your existing towns, right? One of the other things that this is really beneficial for is your infrastructure costs. How many politicians or elected officials do we have? Any? Okay, we got a couple. Hi guys, thanks for coming. One of your biggest challenges is probably your city budget. And while we know that New England is also special in its lack of sewer in many communities, you still have lots of stuff you have to pay for. And the more that you're paying for that, with large houses on large lots with very few ratepayers in them, the harder it's gonna be to pay for all of that stuff as we exponentially increase the length by doing more of the thing that is already not solvent. So instead, what we talk about is housing choice. How do we get to an infill density that is providing housing for all of our household types that need it in a wide variety of price points and sizes on a really small footprint? This is often really familiar in terms of your traditional downtowns, your traditional village centers are gonna have this kind of pattern where you've got a carriage house in the back, you've got a house that's actually looks like a big house, but it's a triple decker, it's a stacked flat, it's been converted into apartments. Your big challenge is not convincing people to build this way. It is making it legal for them to do so. And in every community in America that we have worked, where people have made it legal to do this kind of housing choice, it naturally happens almost as soon as people figure out it's possible. It also means you have an enormous increase in the number of people paying to maintain the same infrastructure, right? So city budgets, this is not really an option in most communities. As we talk to about that kind of big house, small household problem, you'll see that really what has cratered in the United States recently is the number of small homes that we're building. This number of really large homes on large lots is a very unusual, I mentioned, historical fact, right? We typically built much smaller houses and had many, many more people in them. So this is your, again, really high value. I'm here, I've flown in from out of town to explain some very complicated housing math, which is if your house is bigger, it's generally more expensive. So you're welcome. Which also means that if we can make those houses smaller and share more resources, they can get less expensive. So here's our average lot size in New England. If we cut that square footage and up into 4, right, we can drop those costs down. This is gonna be the whole challenge that I'm showing you case studies trying to do. take something big, cut it up into smaller, more bite-sized things to be shared among more people. Here's a case study of, and we often see that when we start to talk about 1,500 square foot lot sizes, people start to get itchy, right? Our planners get a little bit anxious. So here's what that looks like. Here are 4 500 square foot houses that we built. We asked our city council we got 17 variances on this project. That's what it's like working in Fayetteville. I asked for 17 variances and got them in one meeting with no public comment. It's really fun. It's as fun as it sounds. We took a 50 by 150 downtown corner lot, and we said the thing that you legally would let us do by right is a 2,000 square foot, 4-bedroom house that 4 students might live in with 4 cars. Can we instead do 4 1-bedroom houses with 4 cars, but we can sell them fee simple so somebody can buy them with a normal mortgage? They said yes. So we built these, and I always show the site plan for this because it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. They had to be pantry duplexes. So they had to be townhouses, no more than 2 attached. So they get this little pantry in the back. They're little houses, you park in between them. These sold for $150,000 when they first hit the market in 2017, which was affordable to 70% AMI for my housing affordability nerds, with 0 subsidy market rate, with the developer making money on them. It's the power of giving people variances and letting them build stuff. So those little pantries are what made this work, but one of these is on a 1,300 square foot lot. So we often say to people, a 1,200 square foot lot is about right, because what if we needed a couple square feet less than that? Very small lot sizes let us use traditional financing, traditional construction type, no fire sprinklers, nothing complicated to build housing. Here's the same developer, same neighborhood right up the street. By this point, the developer and I had both been on the planning commission writing zoning code for a few years, so this one had no variances. It looks like 2 big historic houses. It's 2 big American 4 squares is sort of what this is based on. Really big front porches. We got a really new complicated stormwater code, so there's infiltration trench in the front of the houses. It's secretly 8 townhouses. So the long side faces the street. They get the front unit gets a really big front porch that's almost as big as their living room. They park in the back on an alley, and you'll see later, we're talking about I'm trying to convince you this is a good idea. That's structure 1, right? And then we'll talk about why it makes a lot of money for you as a town. That's part 2 of this talk. So you'll see these again in terms of tax value per acre of putting 4 houses on a traditional downtown neighborhood lot. Why can't we do this? Any shout out answers? What's our biggest?
Zoning is stupid.
Zoning is stupid. Thank you, Ivy. She's not, she just knows. All right, 75% of our land area in most American cities and towns is dedicated to single-family home zoning. That's the pink. This is from the New York Times. You can go and get this chart for your county, which means the part of town that we like the most and we put on the postcard and we think is the most fun and people pay money to come and visit, we refuse to let anyone build like that. Absolutely not allowed. Doesn't matter how many variances you ask for. You cannot have mixed-use buildings above art galleries without fire sprinklers that don't have fire separation from the cafe next door. People will die. Instead, it's only safe to build like this. This is the only thing we'll allow. And then we wonder why we have a parking problem, right? How do these people get to that cafe? They have to drive their car because there's no way to get out of this neighborhood unless you leave in a car. So one of the other things I want you guys to think about is housing being expensive is not an accidental byproduct of zoning codes. Most zoning codes were passed in the 1960s in a direct response to the Fair Housing Act. Who feels familiar that you've read this book? Yeah? Well, this one's our urban renewal plan, but I do mean there's a number of really good books, The Color of Law being the best one, about why zoning codes actually don't have a great history and they're not sort of this accidental, neutral product that we should protect and think is safe. In my community, before we passed our modern zoning, we had a surplus of affordable housing with too many affordable units, we had the right number of middle income units, and we had a desperate shortage of luxury housing. It was allowed to build luxury housing, but no one did. So they said, let's fix that. They designed their zoning to make housing more expensive. They said so right in the meetings. And my town is not special. I just did the most research there, so I can show you the slides. In the meeting, when they passed this, they said, do you want to encourage large lots with nice homes? Do you want to discourage low-cost housing? Can we make housing more expensive? Yes, you can. If you try, and if you preserve your large lot minimum zoning code, you can make your housing more expensive. It has worked exactly the way it's supposed to work, and it has been disastrous for most of our communities. Our kids can't move home, right? We can't raise families here. We're losing multi-generational connection to small communities because there is not affordable housing. This is not a values-neutral decision to maintain this kind of zoning. You can also see what happened to our infrastructure, right? So here's our, you can't probably read these numbers, so I'll read them to you. 7,000 people lived in this little town, right? That's our original 1830s plat. We infilled, we doubled our population to the 1950s, slightly less than doubled our land area. We passed that single family zoning where they said, let's make everything more expensive, and with one more doubling, we quadrupled the amount of infrastructure that the same number of households were trying to pay for, and then we did it again with less than a doubling between the 1980s and the 2000s. We had increased our land area exponentially without increasing our ratepayers. Our city budgets are just as fun as yours. But I think it's really important to say, too, the system is not broken. We're not using it wrong. This is the way that our housing system is designed to work. It is designed to make housing expensive, to separate people into households that are too expensive for them, to make it illegal to be poor in town, right? To make it illegal to be a starter family. But it's really hard and scary for everybody to get rid of zoning, right? Elected officials don't want to change zoning because they don't feel safe doing it. One of the ways that we have been Trojan horsing some of these changes in communities is with pre-approved plans programs. We just wrapped one up for Barnstable County that is supposed to be launching soon. So I've been up in New England more recently working on that. And there's a number of these that are happening across the country. This is not the only solution, right? You guys could go change zoning code from a legal standpoint like tomorrow. You don't need lots of complicated programs. Many people find that they want them. So this is one of many solutions of trying to get your zoning better. These have happened nationally. This is the most famous one. We're working with Jennifer in Tulsa right now in our program. This one's in South Bend. And they're more about providing the cute plans is the Trojan horse, right? The thing that these programs actually do is come into your community and say, what's wrong with your housing specifically and how do we fix it? We try to get into building codes and finance and your policies and procedures. You know, we sit down one-on-one with a building inspector and the fire marshal and really try to get to the heart of who has to say yes that is currently saying no. We're trying to get to a tool that promotes generally a stronger housing ecosystem. Remember all those things that you had to specialize in to get housing built? Zoning is your prerequisite, right? Housing generally, I've stolen this analogy from Tulsa. Housing is a door that has multiple deadbolts on it. Zoning is your first top deadbolt. You have to get your zoning fixed before you can do the rest of this. There's several other deadbolts that you also have to address before you can do it, but we'll end this talk talking about how you financially can pay for that. Implementation is really important too. Re-explaining and training people to use these programs helps make that feedback loop much faster, that you're not waiting for developers to notice the 3 lines in the code that you've tucked in there to let them do things. Often we're trying to get to more than 1 house per lot. Now you guys know why. That's really helping get to an affordability standpoint. We're also including IBC buildings. We've got lots of statewide zoning reforms that we're working on. We took 2 bills through last year in 2 different Midwestern states trying to get fire sprinklers out of small multifamily buildings that are house-shaped. That is one of the most important, I think, zoning code and building code reforms that we need to be making generally at the state level. Although, word on the street is Maine is a home rule state, and your communities could be increasing the number of units that you build under the International Residential Code. Tom is here, and I'm going to refer you guys to Tom to talk about that because Kittery has one in process that we were talking about this morning. But in the meantime, building small multifamily housing can be a really great, efficient way if we're not building it like we'd build an airport to get lots of small dwelling units on smaller lots in more walkable locations. We also want programs that are scalable. Sometimes people will have kids and want to add on to the house. You want to make that possible. That is the Side Hustle House by Union Studio. That's part of our Barnstable program. And then you also want to figure out where you need housing. So we're doing quite a bit of strategic growth mapping. Where can you provide housing? If you put a sewer system in, what drains to it? Where is your natural drainage basin? Where is the soil that works? Where are your flood areas? How do we exclude those? Figuring out where you let people put housing is one of the only things that I think zoning actually can be useful for. And how do we get to a dense village pattern that works, that you can pay for the infrastructure on, and then preserve everything outside of that? This is another set of high-value graphics talking to you about installing sewers in villages works okay when this is your density pattern, right? We can get relatively small networks of sewers that let us get to those densities. It works very badly when you're at this pattern, right? That is a really expensive sewer system that's gonna leak a lot. Don't build it like that. Again, high-value graphics for really high-level information. But that as we start to get to this mixed-use walkable village, it can be more parking light, because even if you need a car, you're not taking a car everywhere. You're able to walk to or get close, very close to a lot of the services that you need. So you want to modify your policies and procedures as you go. Policies are as important as your actual laws. You'll have some crazy stuff that some guy in an office has been enforcing since the 1990s and no one's even aware. Everywhere we've ever worked. And so generally we're working through this kind of educate, arm in our nonprofit Inc. Dev Alliance, deregulate with Inc. Codes, which is our zoning and policy workshop that we do with Kronberg out of Atlanta, and then create these Inc. Plans programs where we're coming in and actually trying to get plans built on the ground and pilot them. The most important part of all of this, though, which I felt like I needed that introduction to, is how to make your math about all of this clear. Right? So we're going to look at the value per acre of what we require people to build, which you guys now know I think is a bad idea generally. Let me help convince you. And then we'll look at what you could allow people to build. So who's familiar with this kind of map? So Joe Minicozy, Urban 3, very cool, has spoken at Build Maine, I think. The higher the spike, the darker the color, the more taxable revenue per acre we're getting from that parcel. This is a parcel by parcel map. We'll look at it a couple of times. So generally, your dense village pattern in the middle of town generates all of the tax revenue, and then it subsidizes everything in the outside. That's a really familiar pattern to everybody. We're going to talk about 2 reasons that is. But first, we'll talk about where some projects fit on this map. So here's our best case scenario. Who's familiar with Taco John's as a concept? Okay, only a few hands. We've got strong towns here later talking, who can probably give a better explanation of this. But the really, I think world-changing article about how silly this pattern of development was a cross comparison in like 2003 by Chuck Marone of a new Taco John's built on his main street. They tore a bunch of empty buildings down to do, cross-compared next to other empty existing downtown buildings next door. And the new thing that was built to all the codes, it has all the parking, right? Meets the parking charts, has all the landscaping, the stormwater is compliant, uses are compliant, there's no mixing of uses, right? Made less tax revenue every year than the empty buildings that everybody thought of as blight next door. And we'll show you why that is. I want you to pay attention to, you guys in the back may not be able to see this, but this pink number at the bottom is the really important one. That's your taxable value per acre. So when we require an enormous amount of parking, our acreage is getting bigger and we're diluting some of that tax revenue. But also this pattern of development just isn't actually worth that much. And this is nice, new, high-end tenant commercial development in my town, right? So this is as good as it gets, and it's worth a little under $900,000 an acre. I'll read those for you guys in the back that can't see those numbers. So here's where this is in town, right? And it doesn't even show up as a spike. That's our new commercial district right up north, $900,000 an acre, okay? So that's what we require you to build unless you get special permission. Housing-wise, housing is worth a little bit more than commercial businesses. We have sales tax, so that's a little bit skewed for us. But even in highly desirable downtown locations, right, that first one is sort of out of town. Here's the same pattern at one of our most valuable downtown intersections. That's right in the middle of all of that. This one's worth less, it's a little bit less nice, $700,000 per acre, okay? So here's where this one sits in town. Okay, so this one sits right in downtown, but it's this tiny little gap, $700,000 an acre, not very valuable. Our fancy houses, this is the neighbors that, like, if you proposed building a duplex, on this lot down here, I bet you'd have 400 people in city council. This is that neighborhood. $1.7 million an acre. Keep in mind, too, lots of communities have this perception that they want to have a lot of big, expensive houses to pay property taxes to pay for everything, right? That's a normal perception that we have. So if you do that in my community, that's worth $1.7 million an acre. That is over there on the right. It doesn't even show up as orange, which also means our big set of neighbors who come and yell at us in the grocery store sometimes. This is their neighborhood. When they complain to me about ruining their property values, I point them to this map. Even the more, I would call this middle class housing, we get twice as many houses per acre, so they're worth half as much, but the overall numbers are the same. It's $1.5 million an acre, right? So the numbers are pretty consistent on this commodity kind of housing. It actually shows up as a little bit more valuable in this map than those two down there. These neighbors would still be really mad if you were gonna do a commercial business somewhere in their neighborhood, but maybe a little bit less mad about their property values. So let's look at some of our work downtown and what you could let people build. I'm not even saying incentivize them to build, just allow it. Here is that downtown sprawl pattern that I showed you is right here. Feed and Folly, we got a shout out. It was one of our projects. Went into a building because we didn't have parking requirements. You guys saw that a minute ago. It's up there in the middle, you'll see it. Here's our ugliest rehab we've ever done. Inspired by Monty, we always start with the ugly one, which is a slideshow trick that he also has used previously. This one's worth $7.3 million an acre. This building is worth 10 times the sprawl pattern that has enough parking. 10 times as much. It's got 25 feet of infrastructure in front of it. Think about how much infrastructure the city was maintaining in front of those buildings that are worth $700,000 an acre, when we've got this one that's worth $7 million an acre, right? This was a simple paint rehab, doesn't even have any windows on the front. It is an ugly little silly building that has a tech startup in it now, so they're also generating lots of other taxes. Here's Feed and Folly from a different angle. This one was empty for 40 years on our main street because it wasn't legal to put a business back in it because it didn't comply with parking. So it's now a locally owned restaurant. We got stuck during construction, flagged by our fire marshal that he'd changed his mind about whether or not we needed fire sprinklers half of the way through construction. And to get fire sprinklers in the building, we would have needed to do a 300-foot off-site water line extension. We were on a 2-inch water main under a state highway. So we needed a $2 million infrastructure improvement to put in a fire sprinkler system for our $300,000 building that got a $500,000 renovation. On threat of lawsuit, they let us still open. It's now worth $6 million an acre. Isn't that nice that we have $6 million an acre in taxes and all of their food and bev taxes also, which is their real moneymaker, instead of an empty building? And that's the decision you're making. Do you want an empty building with raccoons on Main Street, or would you like some tax money, please? Here's my first development, my first ground-up development. This is called South Street Cottages. It had a taxable value of $10,000 when I bought it. The city was taxing it based on the entire acreage was worth $10,000. Now it's worth $8.1 million per acre. That's split up among a number of really small homes. Each one of their actual tax bills is not outrageous. They're splitting this up because they're on very small lots into really bite-sized chunks. Here's where South Street Cottages is. Here's my little spike. I don't know what this homeowner did to the appraiser to hurt them, but one of my homeowners really struggling, right? But we are our own little spike, just this little neighborhood. I'm so proud. This is one of my proudest moments was finding this map. There are those little one-bedroom houses that met federal affordability metrics with no subsidy. They're worth $5 million an acre, right? Remember everybody who's mad about their property tax values worth 1.5 million an acre? We compare them to these. They're worth less than affordable housing. Price per square foot, too. Here's our most impressive one ever, is those 8 townhouses that look like 2 big single-family homes. Those are $13 million an acre. That's our best product ever. They show up as their own. You can see both buildings. Little pair of buildings is a little spike in their neighborhood. So again, downtown is subsidizing all of that sprawl that nobody can afford, that isn't generating enough tax revenue to support its infrastructure. That's all familiar if you've read Strong Towns and followed Joe. I want to reference you guys, though, to one more thing that really is leading to this subsidizing of sprawl, and that is the way that we currently assess the value of things to tax them. This is something I heard Joe also talk about a number of years ago that we've really started embedding into the way that we think about these. Many communities are not actually collecting all of the tax revenue that they are due based on their currently published tax rates. And that's because we choose what we say your house is worth before we tax it. We assess it. Part of the challenge with this is that when we converted from hand assessments, right, the county saying this is how much your house is worth, so we're taxing it at this millage, those used to be done by hand. They were done based on tax code maps. So if I sell a house in this tax parcel, it's not a direct comp for somebody in this tax parcel. Little tax code maps limit where we cross-compare things to. Tax code maps got embedded into our computer-aided appraisal systems. That software incorporates those maps. In most communities, those maps are redlining maps, which means we're valuing our most valuable real estate lower than our lowest value real estate. And it's pretty consistent. There have been articles on this since at least 2021. This is from the New York Times. And they've got county by county assessments of if you are bottom 10% of value of the houses in the community, you're over-assessed relative to your sales price. The more expensive the house gets, sort of in the middle, generally, we're more or less assessed at the correct value. The more expensive the house gets, and the more redlining was a problem in your community, the more under-assessed your houses are going to be. That may not feel like a huge problem in Maine. Redlining is probably not as much of a daily conversation and planning for you guys as it is for us in the South. But let me show you how that works in Maine. So here's our general approach, right? Is tax assessments tend not to be very accurate in most communities. Mostly, stuff that is in the bottom median is overtaxed because we say it's worth more than it sells for. So then we tax it on a higher value than what it's actually worth. And then the more expensive the house gets, the more we under-assess it and under-tax it. So when we've got a $200,000 house, for my data nerds, the way I typically do this is I just pull this up on your county assessor. I find houses that sold 2022, 2021 era, so we can see what it's worth. We know what it's worth. Real estate is worth what someone will pay for it. So a normal transaction, and then you look for a community that has done a reassessment, 2022, 2023, some number of years later, so that they for sure have this data. So in our, before the house sells, the pink in all of these is going to be what it's actually worth, what it sold for. They were under-taxing it by about 60%, right? So they had a big under-taxation, which the other thing I want you to think about is these are examples. Think about how many houses haven't sold that this is also the case. So we're under-taxing it before it sells. It sells, we know what it's worth. The county assessor now says it's worth more than someone paid for it, right? So we're now going to tax it about 15% more than it's actually worth. As the houses get more expensive, and this one is skewed. I've done this set of slides in about 10 communities. This is the first one I've ever found that is skewed, that you start under-assessing things so early in price points.
This is in my neighborhood. They just reassessed this year and jumped 30%.
So their assessments, this one, I pulled this in 2024. This is 2024's number.
The letters went out last week.
Okay, perfect. Well, so this one maybe is fixed. This one was surprising. I looked for a couple of $500,000 houses, which normally is about the range that people will say, okay, yeah, that's about what it's worth. You had 2 years where this guy got a really good deal. So we were taxing this at about $200,000. It's worth $500,000. They then manually adjusted the value down to $352,000 after it sold for $500,000, and they got that discount for 2 years. So 30% tax subsidy after sale, 60% tax subsidy before, which means they're paying 60% less tax, and assumedly all their neighbors, I'm very sorry, prior to these houses selling. This gets even more true the more expensive they get. So here's a $1 million house, right? Was being taxed at $600,000, is worth about $1 million. They manually adjust it up slightly to $730,000, which means they're giving a 25% tax subsidy to $1 million house from manual data adjustment after sale and after they know what it's worth. This is extra true every single second home that's expensive in your community too. So that sales ratio gap represents an annual subsidy to this homeowner by the community in the form of undercollected taxes. And it's in this house, so this one is a house that was appraised at $6 million, sold for $13.7 million, is now being taxed at $10.7 million. So we're subsidizing $3 million in value of house that we are not collecting any taxes on as a community. In case you're worried that this is a data problem, here's the tax cards that I pulled to make these graphs. This is from the county. Well, I guess this one's Town of Camden. Do we have anybody from Town of Camden? Okay, great. I always hate somebody's gonna feel picked on. I randomly select houses on Zillow, so there's not science to this. But this is the tax card, right? So there's our sales date, right? We've registered the sale in 2022 with a sales price, so they know what the house is sold for. There's our current assessment, right? $10.7 million. And there's all of our previous assessments. It was previously assessed at $6 million. All of this is on one tax card that the town has and is running. And we're choosing to undertax this by about 23%. They're getting a 23% subsidy. Previously, they were getting a 55% subsidy. So, it's better. But the thing that we have to think about is when we look at those maps of downtown subsidizing everything at the edge, it's not just the value of the pattern. We're literally undertaxing those areas and overtaxing downtown, except the stuff downtown's not worth enough relative to the really big ones, right? We need 111 148 Castines to pay for the value of what we're subsidizing 270 Bayview. Right? The math doesn't work because we're overcharging really small low-income houses. And it's very hard for really small low-income houses to pay for someone's, $13 million second home. I always try to end all of those slides with a little bit of a breather, sort of emotionally for everybody, right? We have really nice places. We are in charge of taking care of them. We are in charge of making sure that we are stewards of them through the next generation, and that is complicated, right? There's a lot of problems that we've inherited, and we have to unravel them sort of one at a time. And sometimes as we start to unravel one, we have to ask some questions and figure out what, downtown subsidizing the suburbs and the wealthy houses. That doesn't make much sense. You have to kind of keep pulling on the threads to figure out where that goes. And then it takes a lot of meetings to get it fixed. You have to sit in a lot of public meetings to make much difference in all of this. But there's no one else that's going to do it. Your community is really lucky that it has you, and you care enough to come and sit and talk about housing at Build Maine for 2 days and think about ways to make stuff better. And there are many tools at your disposal, and also, this is really, really hard work. And anybody that says that it's not hasn't done it for very long. But there are lots of people that can help. And there are lots of people who are approaching this as a moral imperative to make places better, to make housing that people can afford, to make housing that people can raise families in, that can make communities thriving and can give us housing choice. And so I really am excited to be here today, and I assume we'll probably have a couple of questions. I think we finished, I was trying to hit a couple minutes early, but that is end of our kind of presentation on this and available for questions if you guys have them.
Thank you. We do have a couple minutes left. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone over to you. Does anyone have a question for Allison? Oh.
I can just bring you mine.
Way up front.
There we go. It would be a little easier. Earlier in your presentation, you were talking about building the houses that people want. I live in town. I like having a compact lot. I have a duplex. It's wonderful. But something I hear from a lot of people here in Maine is that they want space. They don't want to be near people. They want to have that extra room. Or, I actually heard this from someone who's a vendor here. I live in a 3-bedroom house. I can't get anything cheaper, which I think sort of speaks to supply, but why would I give up, the extra rooms? We've been sort of taught that more is better. That's a very American thing, instead of better is better. How have you seen that narrative shift in your community and the work that you've done? How do you get people to realize that and sort of change from that worldview?
I think that it's a great first question because it's the question that lots of people say. And one of the things that we struggle with a little bit on kind of our policy workshop side is we're often trying to reason things, and our main form of public comment is what I would call a category of people. We try not to use NIMBYs. We're gonna phrase this as a category of people who already have a house. And they don't really care that you don't have a house because they already have a house. And that's asking people who already have a house what kind of house they'd like. Well, they're coming from a place of already having a house. And we're often not getting much public comment from the 25-year-olds who didn't move back to their hometown after school because they couldn't find anywhere to live. And we're not getting much public comment from the young couple who is living in an apartment 2 hours away from where they're working. They don't have time to come to give public comment. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot in terms of kind of arguing for the desirability of this kind of housing is our days on market. Our typical days on market of a product that we design and build with a client or in our own development company is about 4. Our market average is about 62. And so we've got a really good set of data built up that people really like housing that they can afford, that is cute, that is walkable, that is not a ton of maintenance. And when we build it, it sells very quickly, often for significantly more price per square foot, right? It's not very many square feet, so the total purchase price is pretty affordable. But our price per square foot of that kind of product is sometimes double what a larger home is. And so part of this is it's a desirable product that we've got good data on. Part of the other argument for this is if you like space and you like being out on acreage and you like a 3-bedroom, I have wonderful news. We have many of those houses. It's still legal, you can still build one, and there's lots of them existing that you can live in. And no one's saying you shouldn't. We're just saying only building that is really negatively impacting a pretty broad segment of our population. We got one at the back.
Great presentation, Allison. Thank you. I was just curious, you talked a little bit about commercial, and one of the things that I've reflected on is how these older buildings downtown, that's where you get small local businesses popping up, and then the new build-to-suit stuff at the edge of town, the sprawl development, that's corporate out-of-town businesses, and I think that's something that really resonates with Mainers, and I wonder if that's something you've seen in your research and how it intersects with everything you talked about.
Question was, one of the trends that has been seen is that small downtown existing building spaces tend to be more locally owned businesses, while kind of, what we require, those slides you saw of that kind of sprawl pattern, single-use commercial, tend to be out of town money and more corporate. And whether or not that's been true in our market too, everywhere we've worked, that's absolutely true. And kind of all of the arguments that I was making about how, you want to take something big and cut it up into smaller things for more people, is also enormously true about commercial. One of the things that we've done on a lot of our commercial projects is take really big existing downtown buildings and cut them up into smaller suites, because generally the size and scale is challenging in a lot of communities. There are good 1-story, 20-foot, 5-foot wide, 70-foot deep buildings that are a decent size for a small business. But yes, we absolutely see small businesses thrive because it's community-based too. That Feed and Folly restaurant that you guys saw, I gave a brief kind of conversation about how we got stopped in the middle of construction. That started construction in the summer of 2019. We got a red tag, October 17th, 2019. We got to start construction again February of 2020. We had our soft opening March 20th, 2020, the night before the governor closed all restaurants in the state of Arkansas for COVID. The only reason that business survived is they're a locally owned business, and everybody knew what they'd been going through, and they had the network and community relationship to be able to shift into a different business model and have people come and support them. And so there is a big part of this that when I say it's not just about the buildings, it's about the people. Those relationships between your small businesses, those relationships between your downtown residents can help create an enormous amount of resiliency for our locally owned businesses, especially in a walkable community where people are seeing them every day. They're talking about how it's going. Everybody knows why construction has stopped. Those kinds of relationships and that social connection is as much a part of that resiliency as the buildings themselves. So yes, absolutely, and putting people in a walkable location helps create some of that resiliency in community.